This is Musical Talk.
Musical Talk.
The UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Musical Talk. The UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. I hope you're all well. 3 things this week. We're going to be talking about the new film of Les Miserables, of course, which is why this episode has been released slightly later than usual, because Andrew Corcoran and I went to see it last night at the IMAX Theatre in London's Waterloo. So we are going to share our thoughts on that. And also you're going to hear a discussion that I had with Jonathan Cohen about the Menier's production of Stephen Sondheim's musical Merrily We Roll Along. And you're also going to have a discussion that I had with my friend Robert Gordon about the way the Americans treat the British musical. So let's start with the discussion that I had with Andrew Corcoran about the little tiny small musical that's been turned into a very small film, Les Miserables. Well, there we are. We've just sat through Les Mis. Andrew, tell me exactly what you thought.
Hello, is this going to be a complete sung-through discussion? Is that the idea? Oh, good. Thank you. I haven't warmed up properly.
We are coming to you from the confines of Waterloo Station, so you'll forgive the random station announcements happening in the background. We've just seen Les Mis at the biggest cinema in the country, the IMAX, which was a first for you, wasn't it, Andrew?
Yes, the BFI by Waterloo, hence why we're now sat in the station. And it's the first time I've been in that cinema. We sat on the second row, which
I've got neck ache.
I thought, well, nice and central and, nice. And then as Nick pointed out, we'll be having a look at lots of chests and necks as a result. And he was absolutely right in that respect. But we haven't chatted, actually, about our thoughts with the film. We wanted to come straight out of the film and discuss them, live, slightly recorded, on air. What did you think of the film, Nick?
The film, I finally understand the story. As I was saying to you earlier, there's sort of been 3 variations of Les Mis for me. There was the original Trevor Nunn version, which is completely incomprehensible in my mind because there's no idea of place or location or anything like that. Then we had the Barbican redone version, didn't we? Which was a tour, and there were more sets in that, so I sort of had an idea what was going on. And now we have the film, which is every location is clearly laid out for you because it's real-ish.
But what about Les Mis in concert? Surely that explained everything to you.
Truly, yes. I enjoyed it very much. I was gripped. I could have killed the 2 idiots next to me who wanted to laugh at the most inappropriate times throughout the whole, and sing along very badly as well. That annoyed me.
But it was sold out, wasn't it?
Yes, it was absolutely packed, which was very exciting. But I mean, it's Les Mis, isn't it? I mean, it's the songs we know and the songs we love and the songs we hum along to, and overall some very strong performances. Once you got used to Russell Crowe's monotone singing voice, I'm sure it's a thoroughly enjoyable film.
They did a good job, actually, of making the singing and the quality and maybe the to the extent to which each person could sing almost become a secondary thing to what we were seeing on the screen, which helped with the film. Certainly when you hear that Russell Crowe perhaps doesn't have the greatest singing voice, because actually, yes, after a while you don't really notice.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so.
And what I really liked about the film was that these performances are incredibly raw. The camera work is also quite amateurish at certain ways. That the cameraman loses focus at certain points because you can almost tell that bit wasn't planned, and it's kind of it's not polished at all, is it?
Or the Steadicam bumps into someone. I noticed a couple of times. You notice these sort of little things on the IMAX screen occasionally. I did. Well, it didn't happen exclusively, but Tom Hooper's direction had this clever idea that it harked back to, which was whenever we had anyone doing a particularly long solo, whether it be I Dreamed a Dream, On My Own, Empty Chairs at Empty Tables, you will notice, if you haven't yet seen the film when you go and see it, that they are all done in full head close-up, which I guess helps with the idea that they're not necessarily speaking out loud at that moment, and what we're seeing is their inner thoughts with them singing it, and I thought that helped that idea across very well at those points.
Hugh Jackman is wonderful in this, I think. He doesn't give... I mean, we have the lovely cameo from Colm Wilkinson playing the Bishop, very early on and at the end of the piece as well.
Lovely to see him at the end.
Yes,
That was a nice
sort of
touch.
passing over this role in a way.
Yeah.
And he doesn't give the kind of very, Bring Him Home isn't the kind of restrained performance that we're used to. It's quite warbly in a way, isn't it?
That's what I mean by allowing us to see the character in close-up. When they sing something like Bring Him Home, you can almost forgive the fact that he's screeching at the top of his voice while people sleep nearby or next to him as he does it. Great, as you say, great performances all around. I probably would have liked to have seen a bit more, not excitement, but I wouldn't say that Russell Crowe looked a little bit bored in places. I think he was just trying to look moody. And
I think he's trying to look stern and kind of, I am who I am.
And he spends the entire film seemingly standing on ledges. Or
falling off them.
Falling off them, indeed. And that's what I mean when we get to the moment where we all know Javert's suicide is coming up. That, for me, was a little disappointing. I was hoping that we would see a bit more of Javert cracking. Maybe there was a subtlety that Russell Crowe was going for that Tom Hooper liked in the end. But all the way through, when he finally did the deed, I was a bit like, good, right, now we can get
rid of his voice.
Yes. And I'm afraid Marius and Cosette, it's still a bit of an annoying relationship, the way it's dealt with.
Well, it's very Disney in a way, how they just meet and instantly fall in love. That's made fun of in Enchanted, and it happens in Snow White and things. I mean, it's very melodramatic in a way.
But it's even more obvious in this when you see it on film that they have their heart full of love meeting on either side of a fence, and the next time they meet is when he's been dragged from a sewer, however long ago that is, and then suddenly they're married. And it's like, right, okay.
Marry us, she says. You get the wrong idea.
Ha ha, ha ha.
You just want to say to him, go for Sam Barks. She's much better and more interesting, has a nicer voice.
And the only thing that saves the whole Marius, Cosette and the Eponine story is the fact that I was surprised how much I liked Eddie Redmayne's performance, because pretty much everything about the fact that we have that annoying romance between Cosette and Marius, and almost, I have to say it, the way Eddie Redmayne looked in trailers and looked how it was coming across, and in some ways the tone of his voice, I felt like all of those sort of things were going to annoy me in the film, but actually it came together into what I think is my favourite Marius performance that I've seen. I really enjoyed Eddie Redmayne's performance in it. Samantha Barks was wonderful as Eponine as well, and
Anne Hathaway was a phenomenon, as everyone has said.
That's been said by everybody, absolutely, and it is very plain to see when her performance very much sets you off for the next 7 hours that you sit in that cinema. Her first 15 minutes, definitely.
Speaking of her, I had to laugh because Bertie Carvel has a scene with her, and he just does the Trunchbull voice. That's the only voice he seems to do nowadays. And it just made me laugh as he was stuffing snow down her top. Saying, what you doing, child? You say, no, it's kind of...
There were some wonderful West End cameos, though, all the way through, trying to spot, and that was wonderful.
I didn't spot many in the film itself. I think Kerry Ellis I spotted, Bertie Carvel, Cole Wilkinson, obviously. Did any scream out to you?
Yeah, well, there were. What was lovely about it was even in some of the scenes there were even people who maybe have only really been ensemble or featured ensemble, particularly in some of Cameron Mackintosh's shows, or even in other shows in the West End that have been cast in this, and you get to see them on screen. Now, how wonderful is it? It's a proper tribute to the West End and the power that it has, that they all appear in this film, and it is such a strong film, and you have to add them and give them credit into why this film is going to be one of the big blockbusters of this year.
Gina Beck as well. I think
the Gibsons.
Yes.
Well done, the Gibsons. You were marvellous. I was always watching through them. I was just saying they've reordered certain elements, and they clearly have gone back to the original Victor Hugo novel to try and make sense of certain areas. I really like now the jump from Valjean saving Cosette from the Thénardiers to the jump to the students 9 years later. That's dealt with very differently in this film, and when the transition to 9 years later came up, I found that really exciting the way they did. And also I wonder, and there is obviously some new music written in, but I almost have a feeling, have they also gone back to Les Mis previews or the original Barbican Les Mis
concept album
for some of the themes that they brought, and some of the lyrics as well that they came back in? Obviously certain rewrites have been done, but it was nice to see them really tinker with the score in such a way that makes it that they they've also worked around how the singers have sung it, and then made the decision as to how it should sound in an orchestration way. The first time I really noticed that was in I Dreamed a Dream, and there's a moment where Anne Hathaway as Fantine goes, her facial expression changes, and you know, her eyes widen and everything. And at that moment, they decided that they would make the orchestration swell, and you just go, that is perfect what you've done there, and almost geeky in a musical way, absolutely. But then they carry that on for the rest of the film, and what they've clearly done is they've waited for Tom Hooper to choose which take he's going to have, what speed they're singing at, where they do the pauses, how Tom Hooper wants it to then transition into the next scene, and all that sort of thing, to actually then make a decision on what's going to happen orchestrally. And that was a really exciting thing to watch, certainly for me, who works on the musical side of musical theatre. I noticed that they did actually pick out certain things that have been hidden and are still hidden in the West End orchestration, and they have picked them out and allowed you, and maybe some of the harmonies that that are sung, and allowed them to come out, you know, because they work for the film.
And what I really liked was One Day More is quite a hard song to follow on stage, but the way they do it in the film is they'll do close-ups of the line you need to hear when it's having the counterpoint, and they'll turn everyone else down in the mix, and you'll be able to hear what line Cosette is saying, or what line, or Courgette as she's called at one point, what line Cosette is saying, what line Maris is saying, and Valjean, and the rest of them. It works very well as a film. That's
the beauty of post-production mixing, of course, as well. But you're right, as you said right back at the start, that this has allowed Cameron Mackintosh and, as I say, Tom Hooper and the rest of the creative team to turn around and go, how can we make this story work for us on the screen and allow an audience to sit there for the 2.5+ hours that it's on for and really engage with the story when it isn't in a live theatrical environment. And I will say that they have done, I think, the best that they could at that. They've achieved it.
Many are saying it's the greatest film musical ever. Do you agree?
I would like to put it up there. It's only been 15 minutes since we walked out of the film, and I've got to sleep on it and let my brain settle. But
maybe see it from further back as well, because as much as I enjoy the experience, I'd like to see it because it was a lot of. I mean, this is a big screen that we had it, and we were kind of literally turning our head all the way to the right to see, and then we might miss something on the other side. So I'd like to see it again. Maybe in a normal cinema, just because, so we're not overwhelmed by the IMAX-ness.
Or on Blu-ray, even, as well. Absolutely, and then it can compare against, you know, other films. So it was very daring that the way that they chose to do the singing, as we all know how they've done it, because it's been told ad infinitum that they sang live on set, blah de blah, etc., etc. But it was an exciting new direction, I think, for musicals, and it has to be credited for that, absolutely. But then again, there are other musical films out there that are great sing-along songs and very, you know, exciting musically. This one certainly, orchestration-wise, all the way through. You notice there wasn't that much percussion in the show, for example. They kept it very string-heavy, you know. So, yes, it was very, very well done for what they've done with it, and they've achieved what they needed to. And it will be up there as one of the great silver screen musicals. Yeah, absolutely.
And we have to give great credit to Anne Dudley, who is a new member of this music team, who played piano for the orchestra, interesting enough. She conducted it, she did the new score, she did new orchestrations, like wonderful new orchestrations in Master of the House, for example, which makes it seem like it's sort of almost diegetic within the scene, as if the pub band are playing it, which was quite, lots of accordion licks. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but a little thing I had with it. Santa Claus is referenced.
Yes.
But the red Santa Claus didn't come in existence until the Victorian era. So I'm questioning that authenticity there. He was green for many years until Coca-Cola decides to make him red.
Yeah, I thought this might come up, and I was watching thinking, why have they put Santa in it? But I think they just about got away with it, and the reason I think they got away with it is because he's referred to very briefly in the film as Santa, and I think it can be argued that there was just a person playing St. Nicholas, because if you notice, he had a sort of religious hat on and a white beard rather than a Christmas hat on and a white beard. But, you know, you're kind of going, well, he's got kids sitting on him, and he's drunk and jolly, and they're clearly just trying to make a Christmas reference because it was opening on Christmas Day in the US. And I was like, well, you know, this is a very... Okay, because we all know that far.
It's also snowing outside in the films. That might make a difference as well.
Yeah, I suppose so. But as I say, I think maybe there was someone playing Saint Nicholas in there, which is an allowed character in, I believe, in 19th century France. So they can just about have that.
Pierre Noël, as I believe he was called.
Oh yes, well, indeed.
I have to give credit to Herbert Kletzman as well, because he never gets enough credit, the poor guy.
But they obviously came on board to write the what always seems to be the traditional, we need a new song in, otherwise we won't be allowed to go up for Best Song at the Oscars song that appears to be in every single bloody...
What do you think of the new song?
Wasn't necessary, and that's why you kind of sit there going, okay, now we got to sit with the Oscar bit, because they...
At least it wasn't called Les Miserables. You could have done the title song.
No.
We didn't have a Celine Dion and Peter Bryson version at the end, which is quite nice. We did have an orchestral mega mix at the end, which I did enjoy.
Over the credits, yeah, because me and Nick stayed for the credits, mainly because I wanted to see who would get a mention. Not enough pianists got mentioned, because there were more than 2 pianists helping out on it, but I suppose only the main people who sat in their little cold box day after day in Greenwich or somewhere.
Having Russell Crowe shouting at them, saying, "You're playing too many notes."
Yeah, indeed, bless him. That's the only thing I do wish someone else would have played Javert. I think Russell Crowe, I got used to him just by the end of it.
When he was dead.
By the time he threw himself into the river, yeah. It was... You just kind of go, if Samantha Barks can achieve what she did, coming from...
Remember, Samantha Barks was from a reality TV show who was not a Nancy. She didn't win. And yet now she's... What's happened to Jodie Prenger? Now Samantha Barks is, playing one of the most famous musical theatre roles of all time.
It's because Samantha Barks is a serious professional singer, and Jodie Prenger is as good quality as she is. The reason she enjoyed success in the Nancy programme was because she was a big personality that the audience fell in love with as a person. That was where the Jodie, because I remember I watched the start of that series and she was very funny to watch and very entertaining to watch, but that's why the audience warmed to her, and Cameron McIntosh through gritted teeth said, "I'm very happy for her," when she eventually won.
I prefer Samantha Barks, so I'm going to put her and Oliver as well.
Indeed. But yeah, going back, I do wish they'd gone down the route of maybe a good old musical theatre veteran.
Who would you have?
Oh, don't put me on the spot like that.
I
don't know, just like an Earl Carpenter or someone. I don't mind really. Any of them, they'll do. They're all fab. They all are.
And what do you think of Sacha Baron Cohen and Helena Bonham Carter?
I enjoyed the Thénardiers. Again, Helena Bonham Carter sort of looked like she was doing it in her sleep a little bit, but they were fun. You don't want them to be too comical, because they've taken this Les Mis so seriously now, and in terms of how they're doing the film, you don't want them stealing all of the laughs as it is. So I think the lengths at which they were allowed to go for comical effect, I think, were just about enough and subtle enough to allow. I was interested to know why we didn't see enough of Thénardier in the sewers. It was a very brief glimpse. We got the idea that they were... But everyone was so much covered in poo in that sewers that you couldn't really...
So it wasn't the same, probably wasn't the best shooting conditions for them. And that's what I love about this film, is it's uncomfortable to watch. With all the movements and the jolting and the... I mean, Anne Hathaway is not gorgeous when she's singing.
That's her hair really being cut off as well.
Yeah, and...
how gaunt does Hugh Jackman look at the start? Amazing. What
I did love was the bits when... Jean Valjean is recognised, and because he's trying to lift the wheel and the cart up, and you have the da 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 playing, and that triggers the memory. But what I also did like was the shot and kind of how it mirrored the beginning at the end before Javert's suicide, which was very reminiscent of the early.
There was some lovely mirroring actually in that all the way through. I did think that, and I had actually read that in a review anyway, that Tom Hooper was, the people like the fact that he mirrored a lot, and it does work and it's very effective. I'll tell you a moment that I enjoyed, that I thought they made the right decision on, was the opening salvos of the students versus the French army becoming violent when the first almost accidental gunshot takes place. is one of the first moments in the movie where there is no music playing, and it's only about 20-30 seconds long, but you just have this tiny little battle. It's not the first battle, just the first opening salvos happen before they go and have to build the barricade, which are left just to happen on their own without any music, and I thought that was a very clever, brave decision to do that.
And also the very silent opening with just the rhythm of the drums in a way.
Yes, we start the film underwater, so you just get the sound of the drums. You don't even know what you're hearing at first. That's a good way to go, actually. And there were a couple of other things I thought they might do as they went through the film, which they didn't quite. And I might have done that, but in some ways maybe that would have been too obvious. Like I might have Castle on a Cloud interrupted a lot earlier.
In the first note.
Well, it just allows itself because they're just singing to herself. You could imagine Madame Thénardier coming in and but they just did in the usual place. But maybe that was the right decision. Maybe I'm just going a bit too camp and hammy with her being cut off earlier, and also because the song is what it is. Yes,
it's a nice song.
It's I suppose.
It's actually in 3/4 and 2/4, so at least it does something interesting.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, I'm sure you've seen Les Mis the film. If you haven't already, you know what to do. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Oh, my pleasure, Nick.
You're listening to Musical Talk.
I'm joined here by a good friend of mine and noted professor and academic, Professor Robert Gordon. Hello, Robert. How are you?
Hi, Nick. I'm very well, thank you.
Obviously, Les Mis is the big film out at the moment, and it's doing very well now in the UK box offices. But you brought up something quite weird. We're discussing off air earlier, and you said something quite interesting about how the Americans were very almost against it, aren't they? And this is a fashion that you're beginning to notice.
Yes, I'm not alone in this. A lot of scholars and critics and commentators on the British and the American musical have noticed that there has, in some ways, since the 1980s, been a prejudice among American critics, particularly of British musicals, against British musicals. And the original idea was, the West End, Cameron Mackintosh, Lloyd Webber, Bülow and Schoenberg had invaded Broadway. They used to say the British are coming.
It's the Beatles all over again, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so British musical theatre seemed to the American, particularly the Broadway show business community, British American theatre seemed to have invaded New York. And there was a deep resentment, in fact, because it was just after, I think, the recession of the 70s in which there was a very, very poor showing of American musicals on Broadway. There was a great exception, of course, of A Chorus Line, but there were many years in which there were hardly enough shows to really compete for a Tony Award for Best Musical. And of course, A Chorus Line in some ways saved the day, because A Chorus Line ran for a very long time.
Ironically, that's coming back to London.
Well, that's interesting,
the first
isn't it?
time in about 100 years.
I don't think it'll run a long time in London, but anyway. The interesting thing, I think, though, is that A Chorus Line ran for something like 10,000 performances, but actually, Cats, Phantom of the Opera, Les Mis have run in New York for much longer than that, and actually in Britain, in London, these shows have way outstripped the runs of any of the American long-running musicals. So I think it's understandable. The Americans tend to see the Broadway musical, or the musical, shall we say, that's a Freudian slip, isn't it? They tend to see the musical as the Broadway musical. So they believe that this is an indigenous art form that Americans invented. Of course, that's nonsense historically, because Gilbert and Sullivan were precursors of the Broadway musical, and Gilbert and Sullivan, of course, were British, and Gilbert and Sullivan were, if anything, more popular in New York and around America than they had initially been in London.
Well, they're still more popular in America than they are here, in a way.
Is that so? I didn't realise that.
There are more societies for Gilbert and Sullivan in the States, and thus here he's always been a great supporter that the Gilbert and Sullivan invented the musical.
Yes.
W.S. Gilbert is the grandfather of the modern musical.
Absolutely. Well, there's no doubt that American musicals were profoundly influenced by Gilbert and Sullivan, and I'm thinking even as late as the late 1920s, 1930s, George and Ira Gershwin more or less used Gilbert's burlesque and the kind of musical forms that Sullivan was writing, and the patter song, they are used in Of Thee I Sing, the great Gershwin satirical musical, and in many other Gershwin musicals, which are written sometimes teasingly as a kind of an homage to Gilbert and Sullivan. But I think it goes further than that, because the next wave of, we can call it now, musical theatre in London after Gilbert and Sullivan were the musical comedies of George Edwards and the Gaiety Theatre, and they became hugely successful at the Gaiety Theatre and then later in other venues in Edwardian London. And these were the first, what we would know today as musical comedies. They were called musical comedies. From these musical comedies, which were entirely English invention, were derived the musical comedies of Broadway from the princess musicals, which are regarded as the first fully developed, sophisticated musical comedies on Broadway, to the present day. Now, the princess musicals, of course, ironically, were also, although they originated in New York, were also written by P.G. Wodehouse. I don't think anyone would call him an American. Guy Bolton, who, although he lived most of his life in America, was born in Britain, and Jerome Kern, who was an American who often wrote shows in London for the West End. So there was a peculiar cross-Atlantic traffic going on in the early part of the 20th century, all the way through to the 20s, where people were writing shows in London, whether they were American or British, and people were writing shows in New York, and some of those were British. Now, there wasn't therefore that much separation between some of the musical comedy teams writing in New York and some writing in London. Though, of course, there was in America George M. Cohan, who wrote a much cruder, simpler, more straightforward, also recognisably American form of musical, which wasn't always musical comedy, because some of Cohan's shows were actually melodramas with lots of songs added to them. But musical comedy, as
most famous, of course, of writing...
give my regards to Broadway, of course. As musical comedy became established in New York, against the dominance of operetta, which had perhaps dominated before musical comedy, the musical comedies of the American stage, of Broadway really, came to dominate, and they gradually came to dominate around the world. And the reason for that was simply the superiority of the songwriting teams, because of course you had Rodgers and Hart, the Gershwins, Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, many others, later on Harold Arlen, Harburg, many great writers who became the writers that we associate with the classic American songbook. Now, it just so happened that those writers, and Kern, I forgot, Kern went on being a great writer of musical comedies. Now, the songs that were hits in those musical comedies from 1916 through the 1930s were probably, one should admit this, I think, as a Brit, superior to most of the British songs. They were not infinitely superior, because we had very good songwriters like Vivian Ellis and
Ivan
Novello, and Coward as a lyricist, certainly, if not as a composer. We also had writers in the 1950s like Julian Slade, who were wonderful melodists and wrote witty and funny and very tuneful songs for musical comedy.
But then someone else came along who sort of changed the London theatre scene forever, didn't he?
Lionel Bart.
Yes,
of course. And then we had Lionel Bart. But the Brits the Americans assumed that they were the owners of musical comedy. Somehow it has become...
Not assumed.
They assumed too, but they assumed then, I think. In a way, it was because of the superiority of the 20s and 30s songwriting teams, really, that the assumption rose that the American product was superior. What they now assume, though, because they've forgotten the history, what many American commentators now assume is that the Americans originated musical comedy. And my point is that historically that's not true. The Americans did not originate musical comedy. The first time that the word musical comedy was used was to refer to the Gaiety shows, which were produced at the Gaiety Theatre in London in the 1890s and 1900s.
Musical theatre is a very gay form.
Ah, yes, you could say the Gaiety Theatre maybe originated in the old-fashioned sense, perhaps, of the word gay. But, of course, it's now a very gay form in all sorts of ways.
And Noel Gay, of course,
And Noel Gay. I mean, that was the other figure that I didn't mention at the same time as Vivian Ellis. Noel Gay, who wrote Me and My Girl, was an extremely popular songwriter. They weren't as jazz-oriented as the American songwriting teams, but in other respects, they were almost their equals as songwriters.
And the thing I pose to you also is I think the Brits have done more to bring the musical theatre art form forward than the Americans have recently with things like the Jukebox Musical. Whatever you think of the Jukebox Musical, it certainly put London theatre on the map again. And I mean, what's Broadway had? Book of Mormon? Next to Normal?
I think...
But they're all going back to the old fashioned,
musical comedy.
I was playing you stuff from Elf and I was playing you stuff from A Christmas Story. It doesn't advance the art form forward.
I think it's a more complex argument than you make it seem. It certainly seems to me to be the case that the Americans, particularly today, and British critics, overemphasize the extent to which American musical theatre in the last 15 years has been innovatory. Most of the popular shows on Broadway are not innovatory at all. They are rather tired pastiches of old-fashioned musical comedies. I'm thinking about Nice Work If You Can Get It at the moment, than which nothing could be more old-fashioned, and in my view, more irrelevant. It really...
The Producers certainly was a love letter to old-fashioned 1950s Broadway.
Yes, that started the trend. The Producers, which I like. The
Drowsy Chaperone as well.
Drowsy Chaperone I don't like. I think it's just a sort of rather camp and arch piece, which has no real reason for existing. But it's interesting that it flopped in London, and I thought that the judgment that audiences made in London was quite correct in my own view. But the thing about what happened after 9/11 really, that people identify the change back in taste among Broadway critics and audiences towards musical comedy, because suddenly, after years where people used the word musical comedy as a four-letter word, suddenly people began to say, "Oh, these shows, like The Producers, are a welcome rejection, really, of everything that Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice and all the Cameron Mackintosh shows represent." So Broadway began to celebrate, in a rather atavistic way, this return, if you like, to the old-fashioned musical comedy. Now, this has gone on in many ways, and in some ways it's produced some quite interesting and certainly very entertaining shows.
Well,
Hairspray, certainly. But also Avenue Q. Those are certainly musical comedies.
What's also interesting is that in London, Cameron Mackintosh blames 9/11 for the downfall of Witches of Eastwick, which was very heavily labelled as a musical comedy. What do you think of that? I mean, the way London tried to do what the Americans were also doing and it didn't work here. Do you think we have a different attitude?
Yes, I think we do, but I also think that Mackintosh is wrong to blame 9/11 for the failure of The Witches of Eastwick, which I enjoyed. I think it's an enormously good show. It's a great show, but I think that Mackintosh should never have opened it in a huge theatre like Drury Lane, and he certainly should have cast someone who really could sing and dance in the central role. But I think that what happened here actually is also to do. Mackintosh is responsible for that too. That Mackintosh has created a kind of taste for pseudo-operatic, very, very visual shows.
Grand operas in a way.
But using a musical theatre or operetta format. And there is a huge taste for that now in London, and from a tourist audience. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying it's not musical comedy. So I think the change away from a taste for musical comedy in the West End was a result of Mackintosh's huge success with Cats, with Les Mis, with Phantom in the 1980s and 90s.
For those of us that don't know, give us a brief definition of the term musical comedy, because it's not. Some people nowadays might think The Producers is a musical comedy because it's a comedy, ha ha ha, that happens to be a musical, but it's a bit deeper than that, isn't it, Robert?
Yes, well, the original use of the word musical comedy was that simple usage. The musical comedies of Edwards in the 1890s and 1900s were comedies with songs. They were literally comic dramas with songs. But what that has come to mean in terms of the history and the later history of the musical in America and then in Britain has been a number of shows where there is a great concentration on dialogue and book and what the Americans call shtick, certain comic scenes which are often inserted just to get a laugh into the shows, and shows which are not composed musically as an integrated whole, but where songs are inserted at appropriate points in the action willy-nilly. And sometimes in the early days, these songs were written by many, many different teams of songwriters, not by the one team of songwriters. So musical comedy has also come to mean not just comedies which have songs in them, but shows which are predominantly comic, but where there is no serious integration of musical composition and dramaturgical composition to make a whole.
You could argue in that aspect that a pantomime blends the two meanings of musical comedy, because
yes,
in modern pantomime is full of pop songs, doesn't really have a musical voice, but they're still funny, but they're written for the sake of being funny as well. So
exactly, and I think probably I haven't thought about this very deeply, but I think probably one might say that in Britain, panto has had a great influence on musical comedy, which is why, in the 50s you could have a show as non-integrated as Salad Days being one of the most successful shows of all time, actually the longest running shows to run in the 1950s. And it's a ridiculous little story, but it's very sweet and charming, and we go to see Salad Days in the same sort of mood as we go to see a pantomime.
Obviously, Billy Elliot has been the most recent big British show on Broadway, and Matilda's soon to open on Broadway, and people are convinced that'll be a big hit as well. We can't tell. But, I mean, when we've had this discussion before, you bring Billy Elliot up a lot, don't you?
I think Billy Elliot is the greatest British musical of all time. I think that because I think it is a serious, quote-unquote, piece of theatre, in the sense that it actually works coherently as a piece of political theatre, but it's also a piece of popular theatre, genuinely popular theatre. And I think that what Stephen Daldry and Lee Hall and Elton John did...
Elton John less so.
Well, perhaps, but what they did in collaboration was to create a musical which is completely justifiable as a musical. In other words, when you look at the film, it's a film about a boy who grows up in a mining community, and it's very much about that community and the strike at the time, or the miners' strike. But he happens to want to be a dancer, and he happens to be talented, and so that's part of the story. But of course, if you're going to make it into a musical, you have to justify why it's a musical. And of course, what Daldry and Hall and Elton John have done so brilliantly is to turn it into a musical about a young dancer. So of course this motivates and gives a point to every single moment of dance in the show. So the audience never feel that the dancing and the singing is contrived. It always seems to be the essence and the core of the narrative.
Do you think there was, I mean, going back to our original discussion, do you think there was anger on Broadway that this this British show won so many Tony Awards?
I think it started even before that. John Lahr, the famous American critic for The New Yorker, who lived in London for many years.
Son of Bert Lahr, who was...
Son of Bert Lahr, the Cowardly Lion. John Lahr, who wrote a number of books on Joe Orton, and actually contributed to the screenplay of Prick Up Your Ears about Joe Orton's biography. John Lahr should know better. He has lived in London for 15 years, but he wrote a poisonous review of the London production in The New Yorker, and he literally says that British culture loathes success, that it's about failure, and it's about being miserable, and it's about avoiding success and being sort of grey and rainy. And American musicals are about plenty and about plenitude and about success. And that's
true in a way, I think.
That's the American dream. Well, it's a caricature. What he says, I think quite insultingly and rather xenophobically, in that article, is that the British can't write musicals. He says they can't write musicals, and he says the best British musicals were The Boyfriend and Oliver, and even those are not that good. Of course, he misses out all the musicals which might be used against his argument. But what he is insinuating is that the musical as such, in whatever form, can only exist to celebrate and advertise the American dream. And I think that's tosh. I think what he misses about Billy Elliot, and what many American critics and audiences miss about British theatre and British musicals in particular, they miss the society. They don't understand the reason that Billy Elliot is so moving is it is about a period of British history which anybody over the age of 35, I think, will know something about, and we are deeply connected to it still. And it's about the worst of the Thatcher years, and no matter which side of the political spectrum you were on at that time, you would be very, very emotional, I think, in your reaction to any representation of the miners' strike. And that's what Billy Elliot is about. Now, to an American, that means very little, because Geordies, miners, in the north of England, and singing miners who have a child who dances, mean very little in an American context, though the show was quite popular on Broadway. But critics didn't always get it. Some of the critics in America on Broadway did get it, but quite a few of the critics, I think, responded like John Lahr, although not quite as patronisingly.
Ghost was a big flop on Broadway, mostly because there were technical issues on the one press night that Americans do. How do you think Matilda will go down with American critics and audiences?
I'm not sure, because as you yourself pointed out to me, the Americans only know Matilda as a rather poor film, so they think this is just an adaptation of the film, when in fact it ignores the film. Dennis Kelly and Tim Minchin had already told us a year ago that they went back to the book when they were writing Matilda. I think it's funny enough as a musical comedy, if you want to call it that. I think it's witty, I think it's charming, I think it's a bit offbeat. And so I think it will have a success on Broadway. I'm not sure it will have quite the same success as it is having and possibly will have in London. I think it will probably run longer in London because there's a very English idiom in the music and the lyrics. But
it's lots of pantomime in a way.
Yes, it has a lot of connections with pantomime. And I think that kind of family entertainment has always appealed enormously in London, and even shows which aren't as good as Matilda in that genre have succeeded in the West End where they may not have succeeded on Broadway.
And do you think Matilda was another step in British theatre history in a way?
I think it's brilliant. I think it's absolutely delightful. I don't think it's innovative in form, but I think that the staging represents among the very best aspects of contemporary British theatre.
So do you think it'll become one of those shows like Les Mis and Phantom that will just be a staple British, and even dare say when we goes to America, the Americans will call it their own Broadway musical classics?
I don't know about that, but I'm sure it will become a British classic.
I'm going to hand you over to a discussion I had with the Jonathan Cohen about Merrily We Roll Along at the Menier Chocolate Factory first. But Robert, you haven't seen this show yet, but you're desperate to see it, aren't you?
No, I'm very keen to see it, and I've heard such good things about it, and I absolutely adore the show itself.
And the question I posed to Jonathan, and we had trouble answering it, why is it told backwards?
Why is it told backwards?
What point does that serve?
Well, here you're touching
Have I opened up a can of worms?
No, you're touching on something I'm very interested in. It's told backwards for the same reason that Pinter's masterpiece, Betrayal, is told backwards.
Merrily is based on a play, isn't it?
Yes. So the simple answer...
Is the play told backwards?
Yes, the simple answer to your question is that Merrily We Roll Along, the play written by Kaufman and Hart in the 1930s, is told backwards. But I think the point of that and the musical being told backwards is to show us how we now, in the present, witness a bunch of disillusioned, rather corrupted people who had wonderful, great ideals when they were youthful. And by going further and further and further back, we are able to chart the way and the points at which their idealism gave way to cynicism. Merrily We Roll Along is one of my favourites, simply because, to be honest, my taste is for rather jazzy pop jazz music, and this is perfect of that genre.
You're listening to Musical Talk.
I'm here with Jonathan Cohen, who's going to share his thoughts very briefly on the production that he saw at the Menier Chocolate Factory, the classic backwards Sondheim musical, Merrily We Roll Along. Hello, Jonathan, how are you?
Hi, Nick. I'm absolutely fine.
Good. You really liked this, from a status on Facebook, I gathered that you really, really liked this production.
I really, really, really did like it. It's a show that I've never seen before, but I gather it had a difficult gestation because it only ran for 16 performances in New York.
So that's 5 longer than anyone can whistle.
I know, it's a worry, isn't it? But also, of course, it's been rewritten. And now, as it goes backwards through the years, the cast actually do sing of the date, so you know where you are, whether it finishes and starts in 1980, goes through 1976, a few years back to 1959, which is the actual real beginning of the piece.
And also, I presume this production, when it came out, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, listeners, or even indeed Jonathan, but I presume the modern day would be the 80s when this musical came out.
It was 1980, yeah.
Now the 80s is part of history for us.
Yeah.
So the whole show is set in 3 different eras of history.
Yes, that's right. But in fact, you sort of don't think about that too much. You just know it's set in the 80s because Maria quite rightly has made them dress in the fashions of the day. So you get through the 70s and all the flared trousers and various things. And
now, Maria, you mentioned there is Maria Friedman, the Olivier Award-winning West End and Broadway performer. She's broken out into directing, so she is the director of this production, and she directed this at a school, a drama school in the country a couple of years ago, but now it's her first professional outing into directing, isn't it? And she did a jolly good job, you thought. She
did a brilliant job, and in fact, she did play the part of Mary, which Jenna Russell plays in this production many, many years ago, so she's actually, knows the musical very, very well. And speaking of Jenna Russell, she is incredibly touching and moving as you see her. Well, it's very difficult to explain this, but if you think of the fact that it starts in 1980 when they're middle-aged and then goes forward to 1959 or backwards to 1959...
it's like Back to the Future on stage.
I know, it's terribly difficult to explain. You really have to see it. But it's very touching how you see an idealistic and terribly warm or almost innocent young woman who's going to be a writer and turns into eventually a theatre critic and an alcoholic. That journey of hers is very touching.
Story of my life, I think.
Well, I don't think so, Nick.
The cast, you said, are very good, and
they're wonderful.
Special hellos to Claire Foster, whom Jonathan and I actually saw in Crazy for You,
yep.
And also Zizi Strallen, whom I saw in Rock of Ages. So it's interesting she's gone now from Rock of Ages to Merrily We Roll Along.
Absolutely, and another Strallen with legs that go on forever. Yes. She's wonderful in the bit she has. She has a few choruses and a few dance numbers, of course. So she's absolutely enchanting. Mark Umbers as Franklin is tremendous. Hard part to play. He plays the part of a composer who also becomes a producer of films, and where we see him at the beginning of the piece, which is sort of at the end of their journey, he's ruthless, ambitious, but again, at the beginning of the story, he is, again, a wonderful composer, and in a sense, he sells out.
In a way, this production is very anti-Salad Days, in a way, because Salad Days is about 2 university graduates.
Yes, and optimism.
All full of optimism, and they have a jolly good life, and that doesn't happen in real life, as we know.
Well, no, it doesn't. And of course, actually it begs the question, what actually happens to them from where the piece starts, which is the ending, when they're all, it's bitter. Mary has started off as very idealistic and then ends up a drunk.
You said that.
Yeah, oh, have I? Yeah. And where they're going to go from there, I don't think we ever know.
But it also begs the question, why tell it backwards in the first place?
Well, I suppose I look at it sort of as one might do about one's young life, depending on, of course, what age you are now. But if I look back to when I started out, I'm then going through all the phases leading up to where I am now. So that's what it's sort of doing, almost like looking through a telescope the wrong way around, and you're just watching and watching, and your memory is taking you back to when you started out.
And also, we want to give a special mention to Jonathan Tunick, who did new orchestrations.
Yeah, which are exciting, beautifully orchestrated. A lot of brass and saxes, and a very young set of musicians there, all playing absolutely brilliantly. I mean, some astonishingly high brass trumpet notes as well, which are played absolutely brilliantly.
Musical supervision and direction by Catherine Jays.
Yeah, who does a wonderful job here. She also plays keyboards, and in fact, she plays keyboards while Mark Umbers is miming on the piano, but it looks as if he's really playing, so that's a very, very well done job.
And also I'm seeing there are children in this production.
Oh, there is, yes. There's Franklin's son, and I gather that had been cut from a lot of performances, and apparently they've reinstated him for this, which is touching too.
Now, it says here this is actually based on a play. So, and as Jonathan was speaking earlier, I thought to myself, well, hang on, here we go. Here's a first, a brand new story, a new Sondheim original this and original that. But obviously it's not. It's obviously based on a play by the book writers Kaufman and Hart.
Yeah, and Harold Prince, who directed the original production, I think persuaded Sondheim, I may be wrong here, but I think I'm right in that he persuaded Sondheim to take the book and adapt it. But I think when it first started, it was very, very difficult for the audience to understand what was happening. Now it isn't, because they actually tell you what the years, which year
it's
is.
a bit like Les Mis, they now have projections saying what year we're in, just so the audience don't get confused. Now, musically, does it? We said the years changed. I mean, does it go into the realm of slap bass and waka waka guitar for the 70s, or does it?
Slightly, it does reflect the eras quite well. There's a number called The Blob, which is some sort of dance that they all do, and that's in the 60s. So it is sort of like that. And there are also sort of rock and roll riff happens a bit in the 60s as well, I think in the 1962 section. But it goes, the end of the show, which is really the beginning of their journey, is in 1959, and they're all out on the roof of this condominium they're living in, and they're watching Sputnik, which was the first satellite to be put into space, and that all seems to be auguring so well for their bright future and
towards the stars.
Towards the stars, all that stuff, and they're looking at that, and it's very, very touching because, of course, we've already seen what happens to them at the end, which is pretty nasty.
It's like there was a lovely musical of Love Story, and it opened with the girl's death.
Right.
It opens with her funeral, and you just it changes your whole perception on the piece, and it's not new for musicals, especially a lot of Hal Prince shows, to open. Even Sweeney Todd does this, to open with the ending.
Yeah.
So maybe they just took that and decided to tell the whole thing backwards.
They may have done, I'm not sure. Don't forget it was based on a play.
Yeah.
So the play would have done that anyway. It would have done.
And also, I've heard, but you didn't pick up on this, Jonathan, is that the musical motifs in the score start off backwards and develop forwards as the time goes backwards or forwards, depending. Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
This is a very hard show to review, because I haven't seen it, and it's hard to describe.
It's terribly difficult to describe, which I suppose is quite a good thing, because it does mean that the piece works while you're sitting there, and then very hard to explain. But when you're there, it makes perfect sense. Yes. So you tell me that. I mean, it'd be very interesting for me to listen to the score again and see if that does happen.
It wouldn't surprise us anyway. So
no, not with Sondheim, because doesn't he do that in? Pointillism in...
Well, I know Into the Woods has motifs that grow as the story grows.
Yeah,
so
which is the piece I'm thinking of? Hang on.
You're thinking of the painting one, aren't you?
Yes.
Sunday in the Park with George.
Sunday in the Park with George, he actually does some pointillism sort of music, doesn't he? He's rather staccato and detached to go with I suppose the idea of the paintings being done like that.
And also the fact that we can't describe it means we're whetting your appetite for it. Not that it matters because it's sold out anyway, so you're not going to get a chance to see it. But
well, we're hoping that it will possibly transfer. I don't know if it will or not, but I think there's always talk of things transferring. But I'm hoping in this case it will. It would have to be a fairly small theatre, I think.
Well, it's playing and it's extended to 9th of March, an extra 2 weeks, which is jolly good. So obviously you might be able to get tickets for it for those extra 2 weeks. It's playing Tuesday to Saturday at 8 p.m, Saturday and Sunday at 3:30 p.m. And it's at the Menier Chocolate Factory. They have a restaurant there, so why not make an evening out of it? And don't forget to end with your meal and start with the show first, just to go with the kind of theme of the evening. Jonathan, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts.
It's a pleasure, Nick.
And you went with Rosie Ash, didn't you?
I did go with Rosie Ash. We both absolutely loved it.
Good. Jonathan Cohen there, and Robert, thank you very much for talking to us today about a very interesting subject. We'll have you on again soon, I hope. I just sit back and listen to you, as I'm sure many of our listeners do.
Well, that's the problem of having somebody who's a lecturer on your programme, because we talk about these things all the time.
It's not a problem at all. It makes my job very easy. I don't need to edit at all because your thoughts are so composed and intelligent. So, Robert, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, again, so twitter.com/musicaltalk, facebook.com/musicaltalk. We'll be with you next week to have another episode. Until then, goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk was presented by Nick Hutson, Robert Gordon and Andrew Corcoran. It was edited by Nick Hutson and is copyright Musical Talk 2013.